Before we get started, a quick heads up. Presidents Unplugged now has merch. If you want to support the show and represent the podcast in your daily life, you can at presidentsunpluggedmerch.com. That is presidentsunpluggedmerch.com. Now, let's get into today's episode. I am a stalwart of the stalwarts. Arthur is president now. Those were the words shouted by Charles Guiteau after he shot President James Garfield in July of 1881. Just like that, gunshots rang out in a train station, and the assassin seemed convinced that his candidate was about to take power. As Garfield fought for his life and eventually gave in to infection from the gunshot wounds, many Americans were terrified. The assassin's supposed pick for president was about to enter the White House. Chester Arthur wasn't viewed as a reformer. He wasn't viewed as a hero. He wasn't viewed as the best possible option if something were to happen to Garfield. And to many Americans, he was part of the problem. He was tied to political machines and the very system that people believed was corrupting the American government. How could a man viewed as a part of the problem transform himself into a leader responsible for the solution? This is the story of Chester Arthur. Let's do this. Chester Alan Arthur was born on October 5th, 1829 in Fairfield, Vermont. Being the fifth of 9 children born to a Baptist minister father named William Arthur, he developed this strong work ethic and received a solid education, excelling from other students at an early age. What set Arthur apart was after he attended the Union College in New York and started the idea of law. Studying law in New York quickly led to the politics of New York. But to understand Arthur, we first have to understand the political world he lived in. During the late 1800s, government jobs were often handed out through something known as the spoils system. The idea was simple. If you helped a political campaign, if you supported the right people, if you made the right speeches recommending the right things, you might get a government position. People argued the system rewarded loyalty and was overall just unfair. It created a political culture where who you knew mattered way more than what you knew. The people who supported the spoils system were called the stalwarts, while the people who despised the spoils system and wanted a government based more on merit were called the half-breeds. And as we'll see later in this episode with Arthur, who was a stalwart, versus Garfield, who was a half-breed, that when these two factions of the Republican Party have to work together, it doesn't go too well. And it would need somebody to step in and really change the system entirely. Arthur's connections came largely through a friendship with a powerful New York political boss named Roscoe Conkling. Together, they operated within one of the most influential political organizations in the country. getting people exactly where they need to be and working together to get these friendships all around New York. The position Arthur was given oversaw one of the nation's busiest ports in New York. This was making Chester Arthur rich. Arthur wasn't even born into politics. How in the world is he brought into all this controversy? And while I can't say Chester Arthur was perfect, I can say that the political circles he was intertwined with were major contributors to what made him so controversial. Eventually, Arthur became so controversial that President Rutherford B. Hayes decided that the entire system needed to change. Hayes was tired of all this machine politics, and he wanted reform. And in one of the most significant moves to shut down machine politics, he removed Arthur from the port of New York. The president taking you out of position is not a good look. But to the reformers, this was a victory, shutting down a corrupt system. But to Arthur's supporters, that was a political attack. And either way, Arthur's career appeared to be slowing down. But then came the election of 1880, a time when Chester Arthur was not expecting much. But after many debated votes, when James Garfield became the Republican nominee, the Republican Party needed a way to unify itself. Their solution was Chester Arthur, who was a stalwart, while James Garfield was a half-breed. He wasn't selected because everyone expected him to become the next president. He was selected because he balanced the ticket. Garfield represented one side of the Republican Party, and Arthur represented the other. But most people expected that Arthur would quietly serve as vice president and remain largely in the background. I mean, he's been literally taken out of position by a past president. He's not likable enough to do anything. Whoa, why is he our 21st president then? July 1881. The quote at the beginning, said by Charles Guiteau, "I am a stalwart of the stalwarts. Arthur is president now." What? The person who assassinated James Garfield supports Chester Arthur? Now let me iron out this myth or this misconception real quick. Charles Guiteau was a bit of a nutcase. And no, nutcase is not our word of the day. Guiteau actually supported Garfield when he was campaigning. So much so that he actually made a couple of speeches for Garfield that were not very good. They didn't convince anybody, they weren't spectacular, just normal speeches. But Guiteau expected Garfield to give him a reward for his campaigning. Little did he know that sounded just like Chester Arthur's ideology. So Guiteau, when he was not given a political position when Garfield became president, he got a little mad. And other than the fact that Guiteau was very possibly a psychopath, this supposed negligence by James Garfield to give him a position was what made him so mad, and so mad, in fact, to stalk James Garfield and shoot him in July of 1881. I have an entire episode about that assassination called Number 20, Where's the Bullet, if you want to learn more. But to shorten the story for this episode, when all was said and done, Garfield passed away, And now, this compromised person to throw on the ticket was now the president. And the expectations for Chester Arthur were incredibly low. But many Americans at the same time feared that machine politics and these things that got Arthur removed from the port of New York just captured the White House. But what if I told you that this corrupt politician, supporter of the spoils system, compromise candidate, was about to completely transform into one of the most notable reformers of his day? Chester Arthur's presidency is where it all changed. Once in office, Arthur began distancing himself from the political machine culture that had defined much of his career. He surprised former critics and even disappointed some of his old allies. Roscoe Conkling and other machine politicians expected Arthur to reward loyal supporters and continue the spoils system into the presidency. But instead, Arthur moved in a completely different direction, towards reform. The defining moment came with the Pendleton Civil Service Act. This law required many government jobs to be awarded through examinations and qualifications, rather than political connections. Whoa. So Chester Arthur, through some shock of James Garfield's assassination, had a change of heart, completely taking down the old system. Now, did this completely remove the spoils system from the American government? No. But merit was slowly replacing favoritism. Qualifications were beginning to matter more than friendships. The man many feared would protect the old system, if not make it stronger, became one of the leaders to help dismantle it. And that raises one of the most interesting questions about Arthur's presidency and legacy. What changed him? Did Garfield's death affect him? Did the responsibility of the presidency force him to see the government differently? Or did Arthur always have stronger principles than people assumed? My guess is that it's probably a combination of all those things. Arthur inherited a nation that was questioning its political leadership and identity. He inherited the presidency that had been shaken by violence, notably violence that was somewhat in approval of him. Maybe Arthur understood that if he was going to be remembered for anything, it couldn't be as the man chosen by an assassin. Arthur's presidency included other accomplishments as well. He worked to modernize the United States Navy, replacing aged wooden ships with newer steel ships. And while the Navy would continue expanding under future presidents, Arthur helped lay the groundwork for the forces that would later play important roles in conflicts such as the Spanish-American War, and eventually the First and Second World War. And through all of this misconception, he also approached the government with a surprising level of dignity and professionalism. He actually had so much professionalism that he felt like he needed 80 pairs of pants. This is a joke that I found on the Wikipedia, and I think it's so funny that Arthur's wardrobe was so extensive that people sometimes even would call him Elegant Arthur. But this professionalism, this respect that he was gaining from people who once doubted him, seem like a complete different person from the one that they thought was becoming their president in 1881. And a great word to describe Arthur's presidency is our word of the day, metamorphosis. Metamorphosis means a complete transformation. What is metamorphosis, kids? Oh, it's when a caterpillar turns into a butterfly. Yeah, I know that's where I've heard metamorphosis too. But it fits Arthur's story surprisingly well. The politician that many people viewed as a symbol of what was wrong in the government had transformed into a president remembered for helping reform what is wrong with the government. And just to let you know, one of the most ironic things about Arthur's story is actually what happened to Charles Guiteau, the man who killed James Garfield. He had completely misunderstood the situation. Charles Guiteau believed he deserved a government job because he had supported his campaign. When he didn't receive one, he grew mad and he shot the president. His actions were viewed by entitlement, rejection, and instability. Guiteau believed that removing Garfield would strengthen the spoils system and help the stalwart cause. Instead, the opposite happened. By elevating Chester Arthur to the presidency, what he originally wanted, this assassin unintentionally helped accelerate the movement towards reform. The very system that this assassin had admired became weaker, not stronger. And today, Chester Arthur remains one of the lesser-known presidents in American history. He doesn't appear in conversations about the greatest presidents, and many Americans know little more about him than his famous mutton chops hairstyle. But his story today reminds us that people are capable of surprising us. Some leaders grow into their responsibilities. Sometimes first impressions are wrong. And sometimes the person everybody fears will continue a broken system becomes the very person who helps change it. A true metamorphosis. And that is why Chester Arthur is so important. Tune in next Friday as we talk about Franklin Pierce. Franklin Pierce fought for the Constitution. He kept the nation together. He had a great memory. He was super handsome, and he was a well-respected politician in his home state of New Hampshire. He sounds like a dream. He sounds like he could never do anything wrong. Well, then why is Franklin Pierce at the bottom of presidential rankings? Maybe it's because he was president during one of the most divisive, hateful periods in American history. Can a perfect-sounding president lead the nation through an imperfect time? Learn about that and much more next week on Presidents Unplugged. I'm Ty Svensson, and I'll see you soon. God bless. Thank you for listening to Presidents Unplugged. If you enjoy content like this, give us a follow on Apple Podcasts or Spotify today to be notified that your favorite presidential podcast has released new content. Now, when do we release new content? Once a month, maybe twice a year, maybe even once a year? No. We release new content every Friday at 1 p.m. for my American enthusiasts to enjoy. Come join me on our dive into making American history the most entertaining and interesting subject to learn every single week. I'm Ty Svensson, this is Presidents Unplugged, and I'll see you soon.